Well, more crisis on the education front as University of Cape Coast postpones reopening date indefinitely. Well, students, concerned parents, and many other people across the length and breadth of the country are worried about the situation. Also, the Conference of Heads of Assisted Senior High Schools say they will only return to school if government pays all outstanding subsidies. Students, concerned parents are deeply worried about the situation as well.
Stress on us as students, and especially for persons like me who will be in our final year this year. It's devastating.
We are having strike, we are paying school fees, it's not free.
Well, this is today's big story with me, Prince Minka, and today's big story is brought to you in association with nationwide PVC suppliers and fabricators of high quality PVC doors and windows. Welcome to the program. Well, there are more problems for the education sector in the country. First, polytechnic education has been badly disrupted because of a protracted strike by teachers. University students are set to suffer the same fate because their teachers have called a strike to back demands for the payment of book and research allowance. Already, the University of Cape Coast has announced an indefinite postponement to the start of the 2014-2015 academic year because of the lecturer strike. Well, University Teachers Association of Ghana, UTAG, suspended services last month, and we're learning that, like POTAG, UTAG has also sent their matter to court. Some students of the Cape Coast University also say they've received messages informing them of the university's decision to postpone the reopening indefinitely. Well, two of them were in our studios earlier on News Today, and they are simply worried.
It's going to be a lot of, it's a psychological stress on the students, because for you to know that, I mean, when I'm going back to school, it's indefinite. It makes it more problematic, more confusing and all of that. And already UCC is among other universities in Ghana, we know it's the most hectic. It's already stressed out. So for you to getting ready to go and face all this stress, I mean, for persons like me, as I said, in my final year, and then you get to know that, I mean, it's been postponed indefinitely. It's just not a good news. If our leaders who are supposed to protect us, or who are supposed to show us the way, always doing that. I mean, what are they teaching us? What are they telling us? That one day we should all grow up and pick up political and personal interest at the expense of students, or at the expense of our colleagues and siblings and children. You know, it's very scary, and I think it's hard time that it's stopped. I mean, it's between the government and UTAG. We understand, and we don't want to go into that because both have their stance. But all we are saying is that we as a student, we need to study, we need to graduate. Our future is at stake. So they should just put away all their personal and political interest and then come down, especially UTAG. They should look at us, and then as we're speaking now, they should just look at us and then come back to school.
And you can tell he's deeply worried. But let me just give you a bit of a background to this particular situation. Well, the University of Cape Coast is the first of the public universities to suspend its date of reopening. And the head of public affairs at the University of Cape Coast, Daniel Turkson, confirmed the suspension in an interview with Joy News early on. And due to UTAG strike, teaching and learning cannot be done on campus, he said when he spoke to us. And let me continue to quote him. He also mentioned that so management met and took this decision that freshmen and continuing students should stay at home for some time. And he goes on to say that it appears the advantages are better when they are on campus. And then further questions were put to him, and we asked him as to how long this is going to be. He said they will stay at home, and God knows how long, he added. Well, let's get more perspective on this as we're joined on the phone lines here on today's big story by the former director of the Ghana Education Service, Mr. Michael. And so good evening, sir, and thank you very much for joining us on today's big story. Hello. So, hello, Michael. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now, let's look at the whole issue this way. I mean, we have a protracted strike action by POTAG. Students are still at home. Now we're hearing a situation where university students are going to suffer the same fate. UTAG is on strike. Now, for you, from where you sit as a former GES boss, could this have been prevented?
I think so. I think so. You see, all these allowances, for many years we've been talking about allowances, factoring the allowances into the salary so that it doesn't become a burden, because when you're paying in full, it becomes a burden. So, and the issue of, or the beef of the lecturers is that if you stop these allowances, what I know is that lecturers are supposed to, research and write papers and do a lot of work in order to improve upon their teaching. Now, if you take these allowances, it may happen that they may not be able to publish enough papers to earn them promotion. You need to get promotion, you need to publish a lot of papers. And they use these allowances to do research, buy books, and so on and so forth. So for me, I will suggest that why don't the government sit down with them so that we look at the quantum of the allowance and so that every month we will add say 200 or 100. So by the end of the year, we have covered the allowance. Rather than wait until you have to pay all the allowances for all these teachers, and it's going to be certainly in our current situation. It's going to be difficult.
Right, but Mr. Zoa, what about those who would say that, look, I mean, it's fair, they have a point. They would want their book and research allowances paid them or given to them. What about those who would argue that, look, beyond this, it's also the fate of the students who are obviously going to suffer from the strike action? Where is patriotism? Where is that love for the students in all this?
The love for the students is that the continued stay of these lectures in the university depends on the number of papers that you publish. That will mean that you are improving, and therefore you are capable, or the university should maintain you in the university. So if they are not going to be maintained, then of course the children or the students are not going to benefit from what the lecturers are teaching. So for me, maybe the other suggestion is that they need to sit down with the academic boards of all the universities and decide how are the lecturers going to be promoted? Are they still going to retain the number of published papers that you do before you are promoted, or what? So that you will find a way out of this situation rather than going forward and backwards on this issue. Because in the university, if you cannot get promoted because you have not published any paper, or the number of papers that should be published, and which for the academic board, they are standard papers, then it means you are working for nothing.
Okay.
Because you are not going to get promoted.
I want you to hold on the line, Michael and Soa, and let me also bring in Hani Safa. He's here with us in the studio, but we've also been joined on the line by Professor D.K. Ajiman. He's also a lecturer at the University of Cape Coast. Prof, welcome to the program. Okay, Prof is on the line. But let me bring in Anis Hafa at this moment. He's an educationist. Anis, thanks for joining us on today's big story. But putting together all this confusion that has rocked the educational sector, again, I'll go back to that question I put to Michael and Soa. Could this have been prevented?
Well, I don't know if it could have been prevented. We're looking at, I imagine that we are looking at professionals in the Ministry of Education, professionals in the government, and we're also looking at teachers who are professionals. But my concern, though, is this. There's a crisis, and crisis offers opportunities. I'm looking at what it is that we're going to do in the future. My sympathy is not for the bureaucrats or for the lecturers or any of these others. My sympathy is for the young people, because we all have children in the system. So the idea is this: how do we prepare them going forward, knowing that there are always possibilities of these strikes that's going to happen from one end or to the other? We don't know. But then when we begin to look into the future, we have to begin to question the nature of instruction itself. Already, even when people are not on strike, a good number of our people, a good number of young people come out functionally illiterate and without jobs. So how do we want to look into the future? The idea is that our young people should be as independent as possible. And that can also be part of the way in which education happens. For example, every course that is being taught in any of our higher institutions should have a website where instruction is delivered on there so that the young people can study with or without the lecturers.
Okay, let me just have you hold on to that particular point, and let me join Professor D.K. Ajiman. Prof, again, welcome to the program if you're there.
You're welcome. Yes, I'm still there.
Good. So, listening into the conversation, Mr. Michael Nsua makes the point that, look, this could have been prevented, and East Hafa also agrees with him on that one. But for you, how about the fate of these students who are in the middle of this situation? Isn't that much more worth looking at?
Yes, it is. It is worth looking at because, you know, when we prepare children in education, we prepare them for roles in the society now and in future in particular. And therefore, if you don't look at it now to look for solutions for them, it can affect them in future and then affect the society as well.
But how do we look for solutions when both parties seem to have taken, you know, some sort of entrenched position? I mean, you listen to government, and government says, look, there's a need for lecturers, those in the polytechnics and the universities to understand our point when it comes to the book and research allowance. You listen to POTAC, and they have a different view about the book and research allowance. And of course, UTAG as well. That's the more reason why they are on strike. So where lies the solution in all this?
Well, you see, this is not the first time that we're having a series of university education-related strikes. In the 1960s, there were a series of strikes across the world, and the end effect is that some government got toppled because they didn't take seriously to what was happening.
Do you sense the same situation in this one?
Well, I'm not predicting that, but I think this could have been resolved before it reached this position. After all, some of the strikes have had a longer term, isn't it? In the polytechnic. And government ought not to have waited till this time.
Okay.
Besides, even though government has an entrenched position, government could have played a double-edged sword role by bringing the leaders to a conference, a roundtable conference on the quiet, and debate through the events that were happening, rather than take an entrenched position.
Now,
So
let me just bring in Michael Nsua at this particular moment. Michael, you've been there before, I mean, as a former GES boss. In situations like this, why is it difficult for government to loosen up, as it were, and yield to the demands of the striking teachers in this case?
You see, when it becomes difficult, it means people have taken the entrenched position, and therefore it becomes difficult to be able to get a solution to the problem. Now, the suggestion I am making, and I heard one of the contributors, you need to sit down with people, and then, like I said, are the universities going to still depend on the number of papers that you publish before you get promoted, which is something that is very, very, very essential in the university work. So why don't the university, the government or the ministry sit down with the university and then find a way out of this? Because it is important that the lecturers update themselves constantly. But at the same time, government is finding it difficult to have the money. So what is the solution? And I made the earlier suggestion that why do you have to wait until you have a whole bulk of money to be paid when this can be spread over a year, where every month a little is added to the salary, so that you don't come to this situation. That's my suggestion.
Okay, Prof.
Yeah.
Very well, Prof. Let's look at the solutions before I bring in Anis Afra again. I mean, book and research allowance. That's the bane or the reason for which these strike actions we're witnessing on the education front. Now, listening to both parties, government and of course the lecturers. What would be your suggestion as to how this can be dealt with?
Well, I think the best solution or approach rather to solving this is to appreciate the fact that the monies that are to be given to the lecturers are really meant for research work, and make it a rule that at the end of every process or every period, they should actually declare what they have done with their money. In other words, there should be a way of monitoring them. They don't just give the money, but give them the money just before. But this time, make sure that at the end of a certain period, they come and declare the product out of the money that they invested.
Okay.
But as it is, just give them the money because it has become part and parcel of their salaries. That is not too good.
Okay, we still have Anis Alpha here. Listening into Prof, you think that's the way to go?
Well, there are two sides to the story. I mean, if I were a lecturer there, definitely there has to be money to prepare me sufficiently to deliver. That's one way to look at it. Of course, the government position might also be fine, but we want to begin to see results. So there has to be a meeting of the minds, and the dialogue has to continue. But what I'm saying is this: we have to begin to look into the future and begin to understand as a country that these possibilities will always be there. There might be another strike somewhere. But again, my concern was the young people. This is the 21st century. We don't have to be so dependent on the status quo, because as we see, it's not working now. So what are the students supposed to do? Stay at home with their mothers and fathers? So what I'm saying is this: a time has come where we have to have solid, sophisticated administrative procedures where there's learning taking place all the time. What are the kids supposed to do now? So we want to begin to look at some of the best practices around the world. And what I'm suggesting is this simply, that the administration has to make sure that every course has a separate website where the lectures, the course materials, the course outlines are posted, so that while these grown-ups are solving their problems, the young people are not entangled in the process. So this is how we have to begin to look at it. But crisis like this is where we begin to take lessons.
And I'm just wondering how the questions are going to be set, in as much as you make this suggestion. Let me put that to Michael and Soa in this particular instance that Anis Alpha is given. I mean, online education of a sort, as and when there are strike actions like this, as a solution to ensuring that the students are not burdened in situations like this. You think it's a way to go?
I think I agree with him. Like he said, we're in the 21st century and we are moving on. Can the structures be put in place in the universities where you can access all the information that you need without necessarily having to move around? If that is available, I think that will solve the problem. Right. And the students can also be directed to sources of this information, and then everybody will be happy. So, yeah, I think that's the way to go. We are in the 21st century, and we must have facilities that show that we are in the 21st century. And then all these, hula baloo about allowances and so on. Because if people have to struggle before they can get material information to be able to publish, periodically, then of course all these problems will be solved.
Well, there was one particular point that you raised about administrative structures. I mean, you've worked with the Ghana Education Service. You were there as a boss. These structures, are they there? And looking from the outside, is something missing?
No. So this is what we are saying. If they are not there, that's why they are paying allowance for people to look for information from elsewhere. Why don't you put these structures, update all the structures in the university, online, assessing things online, and even in the advanced countries, even if you want a book, all the libraries are linked, and therefore you can access it. You can identify the book and then make a request for the book from another, institution that can. All these make your work very easy, rather than people running around and so on and so forth.
Okay.
That is the way to go.
Very well. I'm going to have to thank you very much, Michael Nsua. He's a former director of the Ghana Education Service. Also on the phone line as well is Professor DK. But so, Prof, let me come back to you and get your thoughts on the solutions that's been suggested in studio, and then I'll pick your thought on one other issue. What's your reaction to the solutions that
my reaction is that what Mr. Nsua and the other colleague are saying are just part of the problem. That is, they need to have access to materials for their work. But it isn't every research that depends only on information technology. Some of them have to be in the field, and no amount of information technology would be sufficient to do their research. So in addition to providing these access to information technologies for them to get materials, they need to have the finances. I believe what the lecturers are fighting for is the fact that the money isn't coming to them. And government should do well to get the money. If we are thinking of administering the fund, that one can be done easily because universities have done it before. Time was when they have what they call research and conferences fund managed by the universities. And if you prepare your proposal that you are going to attend a conference and that you want help, you pass it through that research and conferences board, which will debate and then approve it. In the same way, you're going to do research, you prepare your research proposal, pass it there, and they will then give you the fund. But then at the end of it, you have to account for the money. It's not just give away money.
Okay, very well. Prof, thank you very much. That's all time will allow us for. Dr. D.K. Ajiman, he's a lecturer at the University of Cape Coast. Of course, they've postponed their reopening, and his alpha is still here. And so let's look at what should be the current posturing of government. And we're not just talking about universities postponing their reopening date. We're not just talking about the fact that POTAC has been on a long strike action. We're also looking at a situation where CHAS is also going to postpone its reopening date because some monies meant for them in terms of subsidies have not been released. So what should be the current posturing of government?
Well, the current posture of the government should be moving the whole country in the 21st century. I always come back to that. These days, I mean, the time of lecturing is fading away, where we have a whole bunch of young people sitting in classrooms listening to lectures over and over again. That is what's caused the Association of Unemployed Graduates. But we have to begin to look into the future. These days, every subject under the sun is on the internet. Part of that responsibility, as part of the instructional strategy, should be as a shared responsibility from the students themselves, so that they are not overly dependent. That's my concern. There's too much dependency. If one person is not there, the whole thing has to shut down. No, it doesn't work like that. So what I'm saying is that even when we begin to look into the 21st century and we begin to look at how we're going to structure courses themselves, the part that students have to play, that is very clear, so that whether there's a strike or not, they are functional. The same thing goes to...
No, but with what you're calling for, then again, it reinforces some thoughts that perhaps the lecturers are not relevant when it comes to education. I mean, if you're looking at a situation where, in a case of strike action, the students would have to depend on online, materials in order to inform their learning, in school, then the lecturers are not relevant, are they?
The good lecturers will always be relevant. The point is how do you begin
where are they when all of them are demanding?
Yeah, but you see, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a situation where they are not available. If they are not available, life has to continue. I mean, look, part of the history of advancement was that there was a time when we didn't have a headmaster and we didn't have teachers. There were 8 students, we call them the faithful league, who taught each other. But what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, just passing information is not enough. Part of the information that we regurgitate from lectures has to now be computerized. And then we want to see the bits and pieces that we can put together that will make our young people functional. And then again, let's look at the big picture. A time has come in this country where every student needs to work on a project. Project means something that they have decided for themselves, that this is what it is that I want to do in the future. You see, we are producing mass education. Everybody is doing the same thing over and over again, but human beings are not wired like that. We are beginning to understand that from class 1, we have to begin to make sure that every kid has a project, every secondary school student has a project, every school has a project. When we begin to diversify that way, then we begin to see the people that are really in sync with us. But this old method of sitting and waiting and sitting and waiting is kaput. It's too expensive.
But you've seen a lot of Ghana's history. I mean, we are in a situation where teachers feel that, look, the money is essential. And there are those who also think that, what about patriotism? What about the love for the country? What about that passion to build this nation, using our future leaders as a tool? You think it is gone? I mean, looking at this particular trend?
You know, patriotism is, I'm glad that you brought this in, but patriotism is not just something to do with lectures and professors. It cuts across the country. We can look at the huge bureaucracy that we have in this country. Apparently 70% of our budget goes towards paying civil servants. What do most of them do? You know, so this is it. That has to be part of the big picture. But what I'm saying, this dialogue has to go on. Because I will tell you, there are a lot of big people driving big cars, sitting in air-conditioned houses and air-conditioned offices where they are patriotism. I'm glad you asked that question, because that ripples through the system. So a professor or a lecturer who's kicking back says, well, look at the benefits that these guys are getting. What about me? So then that's why leadership is always so important. Those in the leadership positions who can make a difference have to be seen being patriotic. That is very important. And I think that should be part of this element, because people feel a bit, how do you call it, a bit shunned out of the system, because they can see others living particular lifestyle. They too want the same thing. So this dialogue has to continue in the sense that things have to be fair. There has to be equity in the system. But having said that, again, the lecturers and professors need materials that they can work with. That is guaranteed. The government needs to know that these things that we're giving you is going to translate in something substantive for our young people, so that when they come out, they are functional literate. They are functional literate. All this is part of the parcel. But the most important thing, that the system that we have now is really archaic. I've seen others. Look, there are community colleges in the U.S. where after high school, 2 years after high school, these young people are functional. I myself did a brain scan sometime in Boston. The young person who did it for me was about 19 years old. He hadn't even gone to university yet. So while he is working in a hospital as a bona fide, qualified technician, he's now paying his way through the university, but he's functional. These are the things that we have to begin to introduce in the system.
Back to the current impasse between the lecturers and the government. Exactly what can be done to ensure that there's some level of understanding? One, teachers will appreciate that government is trying its best to put the economy back on its feet. We already know what government is doing, as in going to the IMF and ensuring that certain structures are put in place to deal with the economy. We also know about government stance on the book and research allowance. Exactly what can be done to ensure that there's that balance, that understanding?
You know, I think it's been said a few times that people need to sit down. They need to sit down.
They always sit down.
Well, they sit down. I don't know. They didn't sit down. And are they clear in terms of, well, the talking is a bit too much, you know. But again, I think it comes back to patriotism again. If I'm sitting with you, again, I'm sitting with you. But I see that you drove in a V8, you know, and when you're going back, you go into a particular office. When I sit down with you, the psychologist is triggered a certain way. So all of that has to be part of the factor. But again, there's a crisis in education, whether they are on strike or not, in terms of how we are generating this group of young people, most of whom land on the streets. So we have to begin to change gears and see some of the way forward. As far as how these two grown-ups can meet and discuss, I think they are old enough to be able to resolve those problems.
Okay.
But my concern, though, is always with the young people, what it is that we can do so that we raise them properly, and they are not caught in such a loop where we don't know what the left is doing, where the right is doing. It doesn't say well for this country at all.
Very well.
And it also comes down to the way the leadership itself is structured. You know, we want to begin to see that there's some fairness in the system, there's some equity in the system. People might not choose to articulate it that way, but invariably, that is the core of the problem that we're dealing with. Others are living better than others, and you say, hey, my friend, you know, if you're going to live better than I'm doing, then you're going to teach the classes. So I think that is the unspoken language, you know, and we need to be realistic enough to see what it is that we need for our young people. But my concern is that in the past, strike or no strike, look at the situation that we have. Now with a strike, the situation is going to get worse. So What it is that we have to do, we have to, again, make sure that we empower young people. That is very important to me.
All right, and on that note, I'm going to have to thank you very much, Hanisa, for being here with us on today's big story. And this discussion will go on. But let me just remind you that we're actually built to speak to the Deputy Education Minister in charge of tertiary, Okujeto Ablakwa. He promised speaking to us, but several efforts to reach him proved futile. That'll be it. Up next is the interactive segment here on Joy News. Stay tuned.